The stage lights glowed warm across the massive Dublin auditorium as the doors at the back opened, revealing a thin, nervous 14-year-old boy from Cebu City. His name wasn't announced yet, but everyone could see the same thing at first glance. He was small, fragile, and clearly not used to such a grand place. His slippers were worn down on the edges, almost bending with each step. His faded blue t-shirt hung loosely on his shoulders, and his jeans looked like they had survived years of walking through muddy barangay streets. He held his hands together tightly, almost as if he was afraid they might fall apart if he let go. As he walked toward the stage, some audience members whispered, not in cruelty, but in shock, "This boy looked like he had traveled a lifetime just to stand here." The judges noticed it too. They leaned in, curious, concerned, and touched before he even said a word. When he stepped in front of the microphone, he didn't reach for confidence the way most performers did. Instead, he breathed quietly, his chest rising and falling with fear and determination. The stage crew waited, studying him. The judges watched even more carefully. Judge number 1, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice, spoke first. Her tone softened, almost like she was talking to a lost child. "Sweetheart, are you here alone?" The boy nodded. He swallowed hard, trying to speak without his voice cracking. "Yes, ma'am, I came from Cebu. I don't have much. But I want to sing for my family back home." The simplicity of his words hit harder than any dramatic introduction. The audience instantly felt the weight of what he meant. This wasn't a kid who came for fame. This was someone who carried years of street singing, empty stomachs, and silent dreams. Some people in the front row exchanged sympathetic looks, already rooting for him. A small tremble in his hands showed he wasn't just nervous, he was overwhelmed by the size of the moment, by the fact that thousands of eyes were watching him, by the thought that maybe, just maybe, this was his one chance to change everything. Judge number 2 leaned forward, his brows drawn together, sensing the story behind the boy's quiet voice. "How long have you been singing?" he asked, not as a judge, but as a man genuinely curious about this child standing before him. The boy took a moment before answering. "Since I was little, I used to sing on the streets. Sometimes people would give me coins. Sometimes nothing. But I kept singing because it's all I know. And it makes me feel like I'm not alone." The room fell almost completely silent. Even the air seemed to pause. He shifted on his feet, unsure if he belonged in such a grand setting. The microphone looked huge compared to him. The judges exchanged a glance, one that said they weren't just evaluating a contestant anymore. They were witnessing something raw, something rare, something born from hardship. Judge number 1 smiled softly, trying to encourage him. "Thank you for being here. Take your time. We're ready when you are." The boy nodded again, breathing in shakily. He lifted his chin just slightly, gathering the courage that life had forced him to learn early. For a moment, he forgot the lights, the crowd, and the fear. It was just him, the stage, and a dream he carried all the way from Cebu to Ireland. And then, with one last deep breath, he prepared to sing. The boy closed his eyes as the first soft guitar notes of "Hotel California" played through the auditorium speakers. The sound echoed gently across the hall, and the silence that followed was almost unreal. For a moment, he stood completely still, small, fragile, and quiet, yet holding an intensity that no one expected. His hands were clasped together in front of him, pressing against each other like he was grounding himself, reminding himself why he had come all the way from Cebu to Ireland. When he finally opened his mouth to sing the first line, his voice didn't match his appearance. It wasn't weak or hesitant. It was a deep, emotional, almost haunting tone that instantly filled the room with something heavy and powerful. The judge's expressions changed immediately. Judge number 2's eyes widened, and he leaned closer, almost not believing what he was hearing. The sound wasn't polished or trained. It was raw, pure emotion shaped into melody. The kind of voice that carries the marks of hardship, sleepless nights, long walks under the sun, and moments of hunger. The boy's voice carried all of that, but it also carried hope. As he moved into the verse, his tone grew stronger, more stable, almost as if he had forgotten the audience and remembered only the streets back home where he first learned this song. His voice traveled across the hall in waves, touching people who didn't even expect to feel anything today. People in the audience slowly leaned forward in their seats, surprised by every note he delivered. A woman in the third row covered her mouth with her hands. Some of the stage crew members stopped working mid-task, their eyes fixed on him. The boy didn't see any of it. He was lost in the song. It was like he had been waiting for this moment his whole life, and now that it was here, he was pouring everything he had into it. His voice rose slightly as he hit the emotional parts, cracking just a little in a way that didn't sound like weakness, it sounded like the truth. Halfway through the chorus, he opened his eyes. The lights blurred into soft, glowing shapes from the tears he hadn't noticed forming. He blinked, and his voice trembled, not from fear, but from memories. Times when he sang under the rain. Times when he was hungry but still forced a smile while performing for strangers. Times when he watched families laugh in restaurants while he stood outside with his guitar, hoping someone would drop a coin. All of that rushed back as he continued singing, and the audience felt it in every note. Judge number 3 placed a hand on her chest, visibly moved. Judge number 1's eyes glistened. The boy hit a long, trembling note that filled the entire auditorium, and the crowd finally reacted. Some gasped softly, some whispered, "Oh my God," and others simply stared, completely stunned by the voice of a child who looked like he had nothing but sang like he carried the whole world inside him. As the song neared its final lines, his voice softened into something delicate and almost heartbreaking. He held the final word just long enough to leave the room suspended in emotion. When the last note faded, he lowered his head, chest rising quickly from the intensity of it all. The silence that followed was louder than applause, because in that moment, every single person in the room was still absorbing what they had just witnessed. The moment the last note left the boy's lips, the audience remained frozen, no clapping, no breathing, just stunned disbelief. Then, slowly, like a wave beginning far out at sea, the sound of applause rose and swept across the entire auditorium. People stood, first a few, then dozens, then the entire hall. The boy blinked in confusion, unsure if he had done something right or wrong. His chest rose and fell quickly, the adrenaline and fear mixing inside him until he didn't know what to do with his hands. He kept them clasped together again, like he was praying. He didn't expect this. He didn't expect anything. Judge number 1 wiped her eyes quickly but failed to stop a fresh tear from falling. She leaned toward her microphone, but she couldn't speak yet. Her voice cracked when she tried. Judge number 2 leaned back in his chair, both hands covering his mouth in complete disbelief. Judge number 3 was crying openly, tears slipping down her cheeks without hesitation. She reached for a tissue, but even then, she shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. It wasn't just the performance. It was the story, the voice, the vulnerability, the courage. The boy had carried the weight of Cebu, poverty, loneliness, and hope to an Irish stage, and somehow transformed all of that into music. The boy looked around, frightened by the intensity of the reaction. He was used to coins tossed in a plastic cup, smiles from strangers who didn't really understand his life, or sometimes no reaction at all. This standing crowd, this thunder of applause, these crying judges, felt impossible. As if his life had turned into someone else's story. He took a small step back from the microphone, overwhelmed. His lip trembled. He pressed a palm over his face, trying and failing to stop himself from crying. Judge number 3 finally lowered her hand from her face and leaned into her microphone. Her voice was warm and broken at the same time. "You, sweetheart, you didn't just sing Hotel California. You lived that song. Every note felt like it came from something real inside you. I felt your pain, your hope, your courage, everything. I can't believe I'm saying this, but you moved me more than many adults who have performed on this stage." Judge number 1 nodded, still wiping her cheeks. "I don't see a poor boy from Cebu when I look at you," she said softly. "I see a fighter. I see a dreamer. I see someone who deserves the entire world to hear his voice." She paused, swallowing hard. "You sang like someone who knows what it means to struggle. And that makes your gift even more powerful." The boy tried to speak, but his voice was stuck in his throat. A judge motioned gently for him to breathe, to take his time. Judge number 2 finally dropped his hands and leaned forward, eyes red. "Kid, you broke me," he said honestly. Your voice hit something inside me I didn't even know was still there. I'm proud of you. Ireland is proud of you tonight." The boy covered his face again, shoulders shaking as he cried. One of the judges stood from her seat and walked toward the stage, her steps slow and emotional. The audience gasped softly. She reached him first, offering a gentle hug, not as a judge, but as a human being recognizing another human's truth. The other judges joined, standing out of respect for him. As the crowd roared his name, he stood there crying in the middle of a shining stage thousands of miles away from Cebu, feeling, for the first time in his life, not invisible, not poor, not forgotten, but seen, heard, and loved.